Hello and welcome to the Quincy Access Television Studios. I'm Mark Crosby. Welcome to your police department. Joining me today is Officer Don Sautter. He is a D.A.R.E officer here in the city of Quincy and has been a D.A.R.E officer in the city for quite some time. Welcome back, Don.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. We kind of reminisced a bit early on before we actually got into the studio here, because I interviewed you and your then partner in the D.A.R.E program back 20 years ago or thereabouts.
About there, yes.
Yeah. So
Interesting.
it is, and you're still with the program. The program is still very much around and very much vibrant. It did have some time where funding was an issue. I don't think it ever left the city of Quincy, though, correct?
No, never left the city. We've always had two D.A.R.E officers since I've been a part of the program, one teaching in elementary schools and one teaching in the middle schools. And so we've been doing that since I've been a part of it, which has been early 2000s for me.
Yeah.
But we did have some issues with funding when it came to running a camp in the summer that we had to figure out. And so we were able to do that with local help, and been doing the camp ever since. We lost the funding through the state, and then it's been a very vibrant camp for years. It's one that people love to come to in the summer.
And we'll talk about the camp, we'll talk about the curriculum in both the middle school and the elementary school, but just some history about D.A.R.E. And for those folks that don't know, what does D.A.R.E. stand for?
It's good you ask, because people forget. So D.A.R.E. stands for Drug Abuse Resistance Education. And that's the name of the program that it's been since 1983 when it started. A lot of the shirts, so sometimes you see retro shirts will say 1983.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's when it started. Not here. I think in Quincy, if I remember, we started in 1989. I wasn't part of it then, but I joined in the early 2000s. And they still call it D.A.R.E., although now the materials say also keeping it real. So they changed the name a little bit, but they still keep the old D.A.R.E. for D.A.R.E. So.
And I know there's a D.A.R.E. Massachusetts, correct?
Correct. Yeah, so D.A.R.E. Massachusetts is in charge of the curriculums for Massachusetts, well, for the area, for the New England area, for the most part. And it helps with funding and with training and those kinds of things for officers as they become new D.A.R.E. officers. I know you were going to ask me about what it takes to be a D.A.R.E. officer, but they head up the trainings and things like that. And then they also help with sometimes materials if they can get it to us, or let us know if things will be changing. There's sometimes been in the past years I've gone to an annual conference for D.A.R.E. officers to go to, a lot of times in the New England area somewhere, for a 3 or 4 day workshop where you learn different things and kind of update your skills on different types of materials. And
So I guess we'll go right into that.
Sure.
What is required of a D.A.R.E. officer?
So initially, to become a D.A.R.E. officer, you need to go through your department to be willing to have a D.A.R.E. officer. And in our department, we've had 2 ongoing for quite some time. So I was filling someone else's position that already had been doing it when I took the position in the early 2000s. Bob Edgar, I don't know if you remember him or not, but he was
I do remember
one of
the name.
D.A.R.E. officers. And so the position became available, and I applied for it along with other officers. So you have to be chosen first through the department. And then once you are selected, then you go to training for D.A.R.E. training to learn how to deal with children in a different way than you have before, probably in teaching and instructing, and also the materials that you'll be teaching. So it's usually a 2-week, 80-hour course you go through, and you stay somewhere local, and then you go to the classes every day, 8-hour classes, and go through the materials over the next 2 weeks. And you, some don't decide they might not want to do this after all, and others, most I think people have decided they like to do it and stick with it and become, once they're certified as a D.A.R.E. officer, then they learn also on the job by going into the classroom and starting to actually teach what you've learned to teach. So.
Well, and as we had mentioned, there is basically 2 curriculums. There's the middle school and the elementary school.
Yes.
Now, have you always done the elementary?
I have. When I started doing it, back when I was trained to do it, I've enjoyed the curriculum. I enjoyed the age group. I think the 5th grade, which is where I teach, is a great year to start talking to young people in a serious way about some of these issues, because middle school is where if young people make mistakes or start to think about things, it's usually when it starts to happen, where maybe when we were growing up, it was more in high school, and now it's more later in middle school where kids say, oh, some of them think they might know better or be willing to take some risks they shouldn't. And so it's nice to talk to them before they get to that point. And then the second program is in 7th grade, so it's kind of halfway through their experience at middle school. So 2 good years, I think, that we teach it. And I really enjoy the younger group, where I feel like they're a little more able to be shaped and molded and be able to be educated by officers. Whereas as they get older, sometimes there's a little bit more different feeling that we try to.
I know that it's probably a challenge. There's benefits, obviously, but social media, a big difference between when you started teaching and now.
Definitely. There's been good things about social media for police, but also a lot of negativity. And so thankfully, when I get in the classroom and start talking to kids and learning about them and teaching them, I think they get to know that what they have maybe heard or seen on social media perhaps isn't all what police are about completely. And thankfully, we can kind of give a positive message of wanting to help young people. And we're not just here to arrest people or to deal with things when they are bad, but we're trying to be preventative and help them to learn things before they make choices that could be negative ones. So,
Sure.
and I think when they get to know us, I was just at a school today when I'm leaving, and parents are walking by, and they have a half day on Wednesdays. Kids walking by saying hello, say, "Oh, hi, Officer Don, and we'll see you next week." And parents are saying hi to me and meeting me. So
because I do want you to talk about that. Talk about the personal connection that that the students have with you, and the, I guess, the vision of a police officer as a helper, as a friend, not as someone who is, for lack of a better word, scary.
Yeah. I'm glad you're saying that, because I feel like some of social media, or just when we see things out in the public with police, you tend to be drawn to things where there's people dealing with someone in a negative way, and that's really not most of what we do as police. Most of the time we're there to try to help or to prevent or to be there if someone has a question. And so I feel like I can bring those ideas into a school and let them know. I do wear this equipment I have on my belt, but you can't see, but I do have it. And I don't necessarily need to have it here. I need to have it in case I might need it at some point.
Sure.
But a lot of times the kids see this belt when I first walk in the room, and then over the course of time, I'm with them about 15 weeks when I teach them. During that time, they seem to stop looking at the belt anymore. Now it's just, I'm a person that comes in, that cares about them, that's trying to teach them. And I get to know them as well as the teachers and the principal and the families through sometimes interaction after school or before school or whatever else it is. So it's a really, I think, very positive experience.
And I guess it's kind of an extension of community policing.
It is, definitely. I feel like I get to know probably more students and families than a lot of the officers in our department. I feel very fortunate about that, where I get a chance to spend time with them daily, students especially, and then through those interactions with the classroom and the school, I get to then also deal with other families and parents and be able to meet them and get to know them and ask them questions about their children, or say, "Hey, I saw you in the grocery store," and they also say they see me, so they remember.
And you probably have siblings go through the program. You've had a child, and then a couple years later you might have a brother or a sister of that child.
I do, and I've been asked many times if I know so-and-so's brother or sister, and I can say, well, what grade are they in, because that helps. And then when they tell me, I definitely have had them. I can say for sure yes, and please say I said hello, and I'm glad to have you as well. So it's a nice connection with the families ongoing.
So the 5th grade is when it begins.
Yes.
So you have a curriculum in front of you. Maybe you can go through that, just kind of a highlight.
Sure.
I know that's obviously one of the printed materials that are available.
Sure. So this is our book that we have that I use in the classroom, and it's called, you can see, like I said, it's also, D.A.R.E is there, but it's also called Keeping It Real. And so the program is, a lot of its foundation is on decision making. So as I look through here, very first thing that I would open up is this flap that we use quite a bit in D.A.R.E, which is our decision making model, and it goes along with the acronym D.A.R.E. So you can see the 4 words there: define, assess, respond, and evaluate. And so it's a model of how to make decisions, because I think one of the things I let the 5th graders know, we talk about, is that 5th graders tend to, well, not just 5th graders, but young people in general, high schoolers or middle schoolers, teenagers tend to think through decisions quickly sometimes without thinking about exactly what they're doing and why. And so this is kind of a way to
They're impulsive.
Exactly. So, which creates problems. So we talk through how to slow down decision making a little bit and try to get to the point when we respond and make a choice, we've actually thought it through and thought about consequences and tried to make the best choice. And if we don't make the right choice, when we evaluate our choice, we kind of think about, all right, what could I do differently the next time?
Right.
So it starts with that, and then it goes through different materials here about all different types of lessons that are really good to hear about. We talk about some gateway drugs, obviously. There's some in here with alcohol or tobacco or vaping. talk about parts of the body that might be damaged because of those uses of those things. We talk about reasons why people might get involved. We talk about peer pressure, how to respond to it, give them ways to think about that.
And it's very much like a workbook. There
It
are
is.
areas for them to write responses.
Exactly. So there are places for them to work through and stories to think about. And they call it keeping it real probably because there's lots of real situations to think about for them. And then towards the end, we do a journal also, and there's a glossary of things we write down for definitions we've spent time with, and then some place for reflection on some of the lessons that we've had. So overall, I love the materials. They've changed a few times over the years, but this book's been, for about 8 to 10 years, we've been using this.
Well, I think they've had to change over the years because opioids have become an issue.
Definitely.
Vaping has become an issue that wasn't in the early books.
No, not at all. So vaping, we didn't talk about at all when I first started, and that's certainly become an issue, especially the past 10 years or so. And then the opioid issue surely has been something we get into some with medication issues when we talk about prescription and over-the-counter medicines. And so, a lot of them have heard that word, whereas when we first started talking about opioids, didn't have too many people recognize that. But when I
Sure.
bring that word up, if we talk about it, the kids have heard somewhat about it, and we can clarify what that means.
And obviously, it's interactive, so you do accept questions from the kids. Any questions that come to mind that surprised you?
It's funny you ask. So we have a box that we put questions into in the room that people can put, anonymous questions. They don't have a name on it, and they don't need to do that. So I have questions where each class I'll look through and answer most of them. If I feel like we talk about has to be appropriate. And so I've gotten some questions I don't answer. I look at myself and go to the next one. But today, for example, somebody asked about what would happen if there was anything dangerous in a school. What would I do if I was in the school? And so it's something that kids have thought about, and certainly has been something out there we've seen. And thank heavens we haven't had a problem like that here, but it's nice I could let them know, that we have a lot of support from the police department if anything were to happen in a school, no matter what the issue is, even if someone's hurt or lost or whatever it is, and there's a great response to that. And that I would be one that would be helping out with that situation too if I was there.
Sure.
So I was able to clarify some of that, and it was a good question. I thought we started off, there was a pretty deep question, and then I read another one that was a little more light, which I was glad about.
Well, I guess with the internet, the exposure is just so much greater than it was 20 years ago.
Absolutely. And so their knowledge about things like dangerous things that could happen in schools, or about some of the gateway drugs I talk about, like marijuana or vaping, they just know more than students did 5 or 10 years ago, because they're seeing it, hearing it, and it's something that they sometimes have right on them when they have a device of their own. Things are right there.
True. And the other thing I'm thinking of too is not everything you see or read on social media is real. We know that there's a lot of AI generated things. That's a challenge. I mean, that's certainly something that could come up in a discussion with these kids.
Sure. I think it's more with the middle school probably than I hear a lot. I know Melanie was just saying the other day when they got their new materials, a new booklet that had some new images, were more kind of cartoon type material, but it was done very well. It almost looked like anime. But the kids were asking, "Is this AI generated?" Because of the way it looks and the way it seemed very real. And so certainly some of those discussions could come up about other things too, since they're hearing about that as well.
And you had mentioned Officer Melanie Reeves.
Yes.
She does this program, but she does it, as you had mentioned, for the high school. I'm sorry, for the middle school.
That's okay, middle school. So yeah, she teaches in the 7th grade, and so her students would be more 12, 13 years old, which is a great age to teach as well. So between the two of us, we cover about 700 or 800 students each a year, myself in the middle school in 5th grade and Melanie in the 7th grade. And so like I said, 7th grade is a great year, I think, to do it, because it's right in the middle of a time when there are some young people making decisions that aren't great in middle school, and then it can continue, unfortunately, in high school if that's what they're doing. So the sooner we can talk about those things and help students out, the better. So Melanie enjoys what she does as well, and has been doing it for over 5 years, I think, teaching there.
And one of the, as I was researching D.A.R.E, one of the, I believe it was the Massachusetts D.A.R.E program, it says it promotes unique collaborations among key community stakeholders. Very true.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think They used to say, the motto we used to have, a little triangle, would say school, police, and parents. And obviously that's a big part of it. But then there's also other people like city folk. I mean, the mayor's been very supportive of what we do with the D.A.R.E program and the camp we've done in the summer. And business people have been very helpful with that as well. And so there's a lot of people. I mean, in the schools themselves, the principals are very helpful, and the assistant principals and the teachers. So it's a lot of different people that are involved.
So the actual class or the actual class session that happens, the time frame that I suppose a student would complete the D.A.R.E program for that particular age, for that particular either elementary or middle school, how often are they presented the D.A.R.E program? How often do they work on these books? That kind of a thing in a given year.
Sure. So the program, for me, I'll start with me because that's what I do. The elementary, I teach in 11 different schools. And so the program lasts about half a year. It's about a 15 or 16 week program that I go once a week to the school. So, for example, today I was teaching at Snug Harbor School, which I'm there every Wednesday. And so other than if there's holidays or if we're not there for some reason. But so I go through the program starting in September, and I finish usually around the holidays with the first schools, which is usually 5 to 6 schools that I can teach in. And then I start in the spring with the remainder of the schools and teach until June. So I get through all, and Melanie does a little bit different. Melanie, there's 5 middle schools and not as many elementary, or compared to elementary. And so she spends several times a week in one school and will continue a school until she's finished and then move to the next school. So I do more of a weekly session. She does several times a week until she finishes her school. And so she completes the 5 middle schools during the school year.
And again, the funding is provided by the state to a degree, or the city to a degree?
So a couple
businesses?
different areas. Yeah, so we have businesses that help us. We can raise money to help us with our camp that we do in the summer. The state helps us some with the materials like books and things, but if we're going to buy other things, like I give t-shirts to all the students, and that's almost 800 students. So that comes from, again, some funding from people that help us out during the school year for different businesses around. And obviously the department lets, Melanie and I are pretty much on loan to the schools, as we technically are called school resource officers now, which is what we are. And Melanie and I are 2 of another 5 people or so that do that in the schools. But we're the only 2 that teach the D.A.R.E program. So we're school resource officers that teach D.A.R.E. And so the department obviously has us kind of on loan to the school department to help out with things during the year where we're not as involved as much with other types of police work, perhaps, when we're teaching.
I guess one of the thoughts is that you're with a student or a group of students for enough time for them to be comfortable with you and to propose questions.
Absolutely. So we get questions in class. I get hands going up about all different things. When we're talking about a certain topic, today we were talking about risks versus and consequences, and how every time we take a risk or we make a choice, there are going to be consequences, and good or bad. And we got to kind of think about that. It's good to think about it beforehand. So we'll have a question about something that they thought it was either risky, or if I thought it was something that might happen. I know riding my bike down the middle of the street. And we talk about how I've seen that many times in people doing wheelies down the street, which is obviously a very risky thing to do.
Right.
So we had a good discussion about that. And then we have this box, like I said, that people can put questions into anonymously whenever they want. So when I come to class to start, there's usually questions in there already. And I have no idea who asked them, and we kind of work through those.
As the kids are out and about in this city or any city, any town, what they see for businesses has changed in the sense that marijuana has now become legalized. So obviously that wasn't in the early books. Marijuana might have been,
Right.
but the topic of the legalization of marijuana has certainly changed.
Correct, and I think that the kids notice that, and they've seen billboards, or they've seen the store we have in Quincy, or there might be other ones coming close to I know there's one just over the Braintree line that's going to be starting to be open soon. So I think they're aware of that, and we talk about the fact that it is a legal item for adults, and we talk about how for young people how dangerous it can be for their mind and for their body, with the problems with addiction and other kinds of issues that can happen. So even though it's legal, we have other things that are legal that are also dangerous, and I can compare that to things like alcohol or other things that can also be very damaging to young people.
Senator Keenan's been on programs that I've hosted, and we've talked about the advertisements aimed most likely at high schoolers, but it could certainly be aimed towards middle schoolers as well. And the concern, I know the big concern about cigarettes, the big concern about flavored cigarettes, flavored tobacco products. It's a challenge, I think, for D.A.R.E officers, because when you seem to have something under control, there's something out there that pops up, and like the advertisement, again, potentially targeting younger folks, that kids pick up, that they simply can't look away or they have questions about.
I think that's really true, especially for the vaping part of things, where there have definitely been flavors with vaping, which has now been technically banned in Massachusetts, but they're still available in other places, and it's something that does definitely draw people's attention. And the advertising that has been on social media sometimes that pops up when young people are there certainly makes things look a lot less risky and dangerous than they are.
And I guess maybe not in the middle school, although maybe in the middle school, but definitely in the high school, you wonder if the students question, well, why is it okay in this state but not okay in this state?
Yes, there's a lot of questions about that, as well as, like I said, with marijuana, it's not all the same in every state either.
Right.
And so, there's questions they'll ask, and some people might have family members that are using something for a medicinal purpose, and so you need to kind of talk about some of those things when it comes to. So there's a lot of things that can be gray. There's not as much black and white, but what I can do is explain, and I can continue to help people understand how damaging it is for young people to be using it. And so whatever it is, if it's marijuana or they're vaping or they're talking about alcohol, that it's so hard for a young person to be able to navigate those things without having major issues with the way they think, the way they learn, the way they are able to focus on things, the way they can, it kind of takes them away from opportunities, and it gets them into trouble sometimes with the police. And that's not what we want to do.
So do you, well, I guess what I'm thinking too, do you present them with case studies? Do you ever have a guest speaker?
We don't usually do that in the classroom materials because we usually follow what the materials are for the National D.A.R.E. Way they've laid it out. But we have had in our camp, we've had people come and talk to them that definitely have had their own perhaps issues, or people that they know very well that they've dealt with. We have, for example, a person in our summer camp that has done counseling and work with young people that have made poor decisions when it comes to these kinds of drugs we're talking about, and had problems with that they've had to go to court over, and then they are assigned to this person to try to help them with counseling or to get a job and other things. And he'll talk very sincerely about how it can really affect young people's lives, and can obviously make problems for your future a lot more than you think, and can really hurt opportunities and your reputation and all kinds of things that when you hear it from someone that's been through it themselves, or that they have these actual examples of people that have actually sometimes come to where we've had people, and through the years we have brought people to talk to the kids at school sometimes too, in evening programs that we've had, and so we've had them hear from people that directly have had some issues, and it does make an impact.
Sure. It would make an impact for an adult to hear a story,
right.
Certainly. So let's talk about kind of a deeper dive into the D.A.R.E. summer camp.
Sure. So this is a 2-week camp that we offer every summer. Melanie and I direct it, as well as we have other school resource officers that help us, and we have some other people that are able to help us with it on certain types of events that we do. But it's a 2-week camp that we offer to the 5th graders who have finished the program during the year, and it's open to anybody, but we just kind of take a certain amount, first come, first serve. So we kind of do it old school. You have to fill a little application, and you drop it off at the police station, which has been really tough the last year or so with what we're doing with building the new station, but this hopefully next summer will be a lot easier. And people drop it off, and we compile them, and we can take around, we started back when you were mentioning having problems with the funding. When we got back to doing it just for Quincy, we started with about 30 students, and it worked really well with what we did. So we decided to grow it as much as we could. So now we do about 120 students from 5th grade going to 6th. That are now going to be in middle school once school starts in the fall. But in the summer, we usually have the program in July for 2 weeks. And it's a combination of education. It's just a really good bonding and building relationships with their other fellow classmates, but also with high school students that we use as peer leaders during the camp. We have about 25 high school students that help us with myself and Officer Melanie and the other officers that come. And also just being able to see those high school students in a different way when they get to know them. They're seeing as like, oh, they play sport and they work and they're staying away from these things too. I'm a few years away. I could do the similar thing. So they really do kind of get mentored and everything by these young people, which we love. And then we play a lot of sports outside, and we go on field trips, which the kids love. We do 2 field trips the first week and 2 the second week, so that kind of is a way to round out our schedule.
So where would you visit?
So we go to Canby Lake Park. We rent buses for that. We go to places like George's Island we've been to. We take the ferry over there. We've done a couple other things we've liked. We've done an indoor roller skating rink for the kids, which they seem to love, down in Whitman. We go there. And we've done some other things as well, but we also tend to go local. So we go to a Lindy's, for example, and go bowling for a few hours with the kids. So it's been a lot of fun, and they love the trips, obviously. So that helps them to partly want to come to camp, but also they really do enjoy the people that they're with, and then getting to know myself and Melanie and other officers, and then as well as the high school students.
So leadership, I caught that.
Decision making and noticing who are the right people to be around, and when you have people that are good role models and good influence, that's who you should be looking up to, and not, unfortunately, some of what they are seeing on social media or whatever else, where they have these people that are influencers or whatever they are.
Exactly. So that's a problem. It can be a problem.
Oh, absolutely.
Influencers.
So they're not obviously all positive, and so when the kids talk about certain things, I try to say, well, I obviously want you to, we talk about looking up to people that you can respect and that have good reputations, and I tell them how important it is that they focus on the kinds of people that are doing positive things. If people are trying to influence you but they're doing negative things, or they do something different when you hear about them when they're doing their own things on their own time, that's not, whether it's just an athlete or anything else, that's not the kind of role model I hope they're looking up to.
Sure. Peer pressure, there was peer pressure in my day, there's peer pressure today as well.
Absolutely. And we also mentioned that we also, big topic we talk about is stress, because there's a lot of those kinds of things that we need to deal with and talk about with young people these days, that I think it's important to realize that there's young people, whatever the issue is, whether it's to do with schoolwork or family life, or we had COVID issues a few years ago and that was causing stress for students. So there's just a lot of things that kids have the stress, so how do we cope with it is very important. And
I almost think the stress is worse for our younger folks nowadays than it was years ago, and the big reason why that, I think, is the internet.
I agree. I think the social media has a lot to do with how kids feel about themselves, their self-esteem, their value. They compare themselves. You can't help but do that when you see something online that you say, oh, that person's doing this, or they've been there, or they look like this, and I don't have any of that. And so it's very hard, I think, for young people, especially at the ages of the end of elementary into middle school. It's difficult to sort through all that. And so I think we really have to talk about that. And I know families are trying to do that, but we're trying to help with that too.
And I guess in the last minute, this has been a full half-hour program, you told me what you assumed would be the number of students that went through your classes since you started. It was an astounding number.
Well, I was thinking, since the last time we spoke, I was trying to think about that. I would say between Melanie and I, we've taught about 15,000 students over the last, almost a little over 20 years
That's
since
great.
I've seen you. So it's pretty amazing to think that way, and I hope that that's been a positive experience for those students, and it was as it has been for me. So
this has been a great program. Certainly, Officer Sautter, I thank you for coming in and kind of giving us an update 20 years later. And it's great to know that the program's doing well and has, I guess, adapted to the times.
Yes, well, I appreciate you having me and being able to talk to you again about this, because I feel very strongly that the best thing we can do is to try to help young people and prevent before things happen. And one of the slogans I use in class, we give out a little cup in camp for the kids that go, it's called Too Smart to Start. So we kind of say that as a way we'd like them to think as they get older, that we don't need to start in the first place. We can kind of sort that out ahead of time.
I'll leave it at that. That sounds good. And again, thank you for coming in.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
And thank you at home for watching, and please remember to support Quincy Access Television for more programming just like this.